Hello, fellow book lovers, both readers and writers. I am Maddie Dalrymple. I am the author of the Anne Kinnear suspense novels and suspense shorts and the Lizzie Ballard thrillers. And I also write, speak, and consult on the writing craft and the publishing voyage. And I share what I learn on the Indie Author Podcast. And you can find out more about me at MaddieDalrymple.com and at theindieauthor.com. And this is my video series, What I Learned, where I ask writers 2 questions related to their latest book. What did they learn from the book that they'd like to share with their fellow authors? And what did they learn from their latest book that they'd like to share with their fellow readers? And I am here today with David Corbett. Hey, David, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Maddie?
I'm doing really well, thank you. To give our viewers a little bit of background on you, David Corbett is the author of 7 novels, which have been nominated for numerous awards, including the Edgar. His short fiction has twice been selected for Best American Mystery Stories, and a collaborative novel for which he contributed a chapter, Culprits, was adapted for TV by the producers of Killing Eve for Disney Plus in the UK. He's the author of the writing guides, The Art of Character and The Compass of Character, and is a monthly contributor to Writer Unboxed. And he was also my guest on one of my favorite titled episodes of the Indie Author Podcast, episode 156, Character Development Through the Pain and Promise of Life. So that was a lovely conversation with David. And his latest book is The Truth Against the World. And so today I'm asking David the 2 What I Learned questions, starting with, what did you learn from your latest book that you'd like to share with your fellow authors?
It's one of those things where you realize that your fellow authors probably know everything that you would possibly have to share with them on this subject. If I had to say anything, it would be what I learned was if you're going to write a book that's going to require research, don't make it something about which you begin knowing absolutely nothing, because the research will bury you. And this happened to me. I wanted to do something. I was inspired by a book by a lady named Emer Martin, who's an Irish writer, and wrote a book called The Cruelty Men. And it was about the factual basis of the book was based on what were known as the industrial schools in Ireland from even before the time of the formation of the Republic in the 20s until 1991 when they got exposed. Everybody knew about them, but nobody talked about them, not in a realistic way. And even Joyce had one of them in Ulysses. And there's talk that the father has apparently descended into alcoholism, and everybody knows that the son is going to have to go into one of these industrial schools. And there is a sense of palpable fear and grief on his behalf. These industrial schools were basically venues for child slavery. The kids were beaten regularly in a variety of malicious, terrible ways. They were sexually abused. There's boys and girls, both. It was usually either kids from families who were extremely poor, or a parent had died and they figured that the one parent couldn't take care of all the children. So the church would step in and help. And the people who came to collect them were known as cruelty men. So this is the reality that she's talking about. But she framed it in a fascinating way, in that it was sort of it echoed a story from ancient Irish myth called the Children of Lur. And the story goes that the oldest sister and 3 younger brothers are the children of a king, and their mother dies, and the stepmother wants nothing to do with them. And so she goes to a druid and places a curse on them. And the curse is that they are turned into swans. And for the first 300 years of their life as swans, they can be close to their father. They're in a lake that he can come and see them. But for the next 300, they're at a very remote island. And then for the next 300 years, they're on this mountaintop. And the older sister is always looking after her younger brothers, making sure that they'll be okay after this 900-year curse is lifted. And finally, after the end of these 900 years, the curse is lifted. They are once again human beings, but they're 900 years old. And they immediately turn to dust and die. And this was the sort of story she framed. You have the whole idea that even if you get out of these schools, these industrial schools, that basically your life has been destroyed because of the incredible abuse that you've suffered. And I wanted to do something similar. I wanted to talk about civil war, an impending civil war in the United States that had its first echo in the Troubles, because I do believe that we're headed for some serious civil discord that will involve the kind of violence, the sort of random, sporadic, senseless violence, assassinations. I hope to God the militias don't discover car bombs, but that's not outside the realm of possibility. But I didn't want to just write about that. I also wanted some sort of an echo in the way that she had of a mythic story. And what I took for my sort of mythic background was the story of Oisin, the son of Finn McCool, and the Fianna, who were hunters and warriors. And there's a Greek word that Sophocles used for his heroes, and the word was denos. It means wondrous and strange. And I wanted something, I didn't want to just this to be, I usually write in the realistic vein, and I wanted something sort of what Amer had brought to her story, something some wondrous and strange by taking this mythic template and fusing it into the modern day story. And that sounds really fascinating, but boy, was it hard to make work. I think I did. The problem is I can't explain how I did it without giving away one of the major reveals in the book. So I have to be mum about that. That's the other thing I would say is if you're going to write a book, don't write one in which you can't really talk about the major premise of the book without giving away one of the major reveals, because it really makes it hard to talk about the book. Really kind of puts a damper on your pre-book publication publicity. The one character who I can't disclose everything about, I nonetheless can talk about him in some ways that reveal that he's a fascinating character. He's an army vet that the other main character, Georgina, meets because he's a janitor at the college where she goes. But she takes a class in Celtic tales and folklore, and he just sits in. He's allowed to audit it. They just let him in. And what he does is he helps everyone pronounce the old Irish names. And they just develop this sort of friendship. And one of the other things that I really wanted to stress, and this is a thing with me, it's almost a crusade. I wanted to write a story in which a man and a woman were friends. It wasn't a romance in waiting. It wasn't a failed romance. It wasn't an aborted romance. It was a genuine, devoted friendship. And because that means a lot to me. I think it's something that we overlook a lot. And there was an old Stella Adler saying that I learned when I was studying acting. She said, when a man and a woman are on stage, they're always totally in love. The only thing they're talking about is terms. And I thought, yeah, but does it have to be romantic love? Can't it also be platonic love? And that was kind of something I wanted to bring to this book that I think too often gets ignored. Because I know all sorts of men and women who are great friends. And yet it seems like in stories, it's the love that cannot say its name. Anywho, so those are some of the things I came away with the writing of it.
And is the Truth Against the World, what is the era in which it's set? Is it sort of an alternate history?
It's a near future, which a couple authors have said is scarily like the present. And that's the problem when you write about the near future. By the time you're done with the book, you've pretty much caught up with your near future. So that's another cautionary thing I would say. It's really about America balkanizing into violent enclaves. And the two main characters in my book have to travel all the way across the country to accomplish their mission. And so they've got to go through a lot of very scary situations.
Were there travel stories set in the US that you used as inspiration for that part of your story?
Somewhat. I mean, my wife and I used to travel cross country all the time because she moved out to California when we met to live with me, but her parents lived on the East Coast. So for holidays, especially Christmas, we would travel this country to see them. And in particular, there's a part of Pennsylvania that a lot of people know is referred to as Pennsyltucky. I'm going to forget his name right now, but he was Clinton's political advisor.
Carville?
Carville, James
yeah.
Carville. Thank you. There we go. And he said that you have to remember that Pennsylvania is Pittsburgh and Philadelphia separated by Alabama. In particular, what we always discovered, and which is in the book, is we'd go by billboards, and there would be an anti-abortion billboard, and within 100 yards, there would be a gentleman's club billboard. And the cognitive dissonance of that, though, just seemed appalling to us, but seemed totally natural to people there. So it was one of those things where you kind of go, don't bring your own biases to the backlands. Just try to listen and look and learn. And that's one of the more harrowing places they have to be, is in the middle of Pennsylvania. There's a couple others, and I don't want to give those away.
Well, I have some travel plans that will involve going somewhat west of Philadelphia, so I'll have to read The Truth Against the World before I do that. Preparation for that experience. So, for the second part of the questions, what did you learn from your latest book that you'd like to share with your fellow readers? What do you think about that?
Well, and this comes up in the book, and it was something where I really leaned into the Irish side of my heritage. I'm probably no more than a quarter Irish. My mom is definitely half Irish, half German. I bear a very strong resemblance to my Irish grandfather. And so that's always been, and I was raised Irish Catholic, so there's all that stuff. But my dad, I have no idea. There's some Swiss Mennonite, there's some German, there's some English. My dad always said that side of the family was, in his words, Heinz 57 varieties. So I have no idea what that is. But the Irish, for some reason, always spoke to me, as it were. And so I decided to lean into that. And because I have Irish friends, I'm cautious about confusing being an Irish American with being Irish. That's not a bridge you cross easily, even though there is, especially in the last 20 or 30 years, it's not just that the Irish have been coming here to emigrate. American culture by Irish Americans has been finding its way back. And there's a cultural bridge in particular that I think has been strengthened at the beginning of this century and the latter part of last century. But one of the things that struck me, and this is in an era where everybody's fighting over what our real history is and what the American culture is, looking at Irish American history and learning that, for example, it was the Philadelphia 69th, or the Pennsylvania 69th, rather. It was made up of Irish soldiers. And the Irish units were kept together largely because they'd learned in the Mexican-American War that they tended to fight more ferociously when they fought together. It was like they were fighting for each other. And since most of the generals in the Civil War had fought in the Mexican-American War, they'd learned that this bond among the Irish troops was strong and they wanted to use them. And the Pennsylvania 69th took their number, 69, from the New York 69th, which was the original Irish Brigade. It was formed by Thomas Marr, who had been part of the 1848 rebellion, which lasted a number of hours, like unfortunately too many Irish rebellions. And he was exiled to Tasmania, ultimately found his way to the United States and became prominent on the speaking circuit about Irish issues and so on and so forth. And he founded the Irish Brigade out of New York as a way of training Irish immigrants in the ways of war so that they could return to Ireland and gain its freedom from England. Unfortunately, the Irish were always put at the forefront of battles, and all of these brigades that were fundamentally Irish were just decimated through battles. But at Gettysburg, the Pennsylvania 69th almost single-handedly fended off Pickett's charge before reinforcements could bring their numbers back up to completely defeat that onslaught. And they fought fiercely and bravely and lost 2/3 of their number in that fight. And as I put it in the book, that day, call them shanties, potato heads, raggers, but that day they saved the Republic. 2 weeks later, the Irish were principally responsible for the draft riots in New York, which basically drove all of the Black citizens in Manhattan up into Harlem. They burned down the Colored Orphans Asylum. They lynched at least 11 people. It's estimated that over 1,000 people were killed. So to be Irish American is to understand this dual legacy of fierce defense of the Republic and intense racism. And that was something that I sort of understood because I know Boston's heavily Irish, and I know that in the busing situation, in fact, Haynes' most recent novel addresses the whole busing situation and the Southie rejection in response to it. But I'd never really understood that it went back as far as the 1850s. I also didn't understand that we were heavily involved in the Revolutionary War. We fought on the side of the French in the French-American War. It's called the Flight of the Wild Geese. After the wars of the 17th century were over, the Irish militaries had to disband, and they went to Europe and fought for a number of the Catholic countries, Spain and France predominantly. Some even fought for Russia. Some fought for Austria, which raised sort of a difficult situation because Austria and France were actually enemies. So the Irish found themselves fighting against each other. This happened in the Civil War, the American Civil War as well, where Irish units were put into the forefront of both on both sides and were firing it very often at men they knew from back home. So that was all very, it was an education. And I feel I've gotten to know myself and my heritage a lot better because of the writing.
Do you feel like you're going to be able to tap into everything you learned for additional books after The Truth Against the World?
Yeah, I'm thinking this book is going to continue. I'm working on the sequel right now. It'll be a little further into the future, so even more, I guess, sci-fi, almost you'd call it. That's the problem. I've had a really hard time figuring out how to describe this book. Fiction mashup is what I've used. It's part myth, it's part thriller, it's part adventure. And I didn't worry about that. I just wrote the story that I wanted to, but it does bring up that whole issue of, okay, so how do you market this strange beast? And I guess I'll find out.
Yeah, well, once this video is up, you're going to have to revisit it in a couple of months or a year, however long, and let us know how things are going and what kind of readers are finding what they're looking for.
That's great. One of the things we have had a couple of reviews come in, and one of the things I particularly was fond of, I mean, she got the book. This is Amanda Gorman for Twin Cities Geek. She really got the book, but one of the other things that I was grateful for in her review is she really got the whole notion, the devotion that I took to make these characters friends. She goes, so often they sneak in this and force it in, shoehorn in the romantic thing, and it just never happened. And she just said it was one of the things she just said, I just really loved the portrayal of those two people. And a couple of other of my readers, I think Rachel Housel Hall said the same thing. She said, I just love these two characters. So,
Nice.
and in particular, I hope that's what readers take away from it. It is very much a character-driven book with all the other stuff I've talked about. It's really Shane and Georgie at the center of the book that really does make it what it is.
So wonderful. Well, David, please let the viewers know where they can go to find more about The Truth Against the World.
Well, you can always go to my website. It's probably the easiest place, the sort of one shop all. And that's just davidcorbett.com. That's Corbett with two T's. And just go to the book page and you'll have little buttons for if you want to buy it from Book Passage or Amazon or Barnes and Noble or Indie.
Bookshop.org.
Yeah. And you can go and get it from your own local independent bookstore. I would love it if you gave it a shot. It's probably the most ambitious book I have tried yet. I hope you enjoy it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Maddie. It's great to see you again.
Very nice seeing you as well.